Hi there. Happy Friday, everyone. This is a quick news summary for the past week's worth of updates that we've had for filming on House of the Dragon, which haven't been that much, so I'm just dashing this off because the big news was when spy photos showed the actors who were pretty sure are playing Aegon II and Aemon. Beyond that, we haven't really gotten that much, and a few things came out in the news, particularly a second positive test for COVID, pushing the schedule back yet again. So I want to just quickly go over, okay, this is a summary of everything we've been doing. Also, because since the first teaser trailer came out 2 weeks ago, I've been cranking out videos on pretty much a daily basis. Then about 3 days ago, I stopped. Well, just to explain to you guys, that's because, remember, the last thing I posted was that mock-up of an interactive trailer, and I said I'm trying to get fandom to make this like they have an interactive trailer for Dune and for Asimov's Foundation series. Well, I've been discussing it with the video development team, and I've submitted it, and they're considering it. They might edit it down a lot. That's okay. That's, it's the face of their company, whatever they want to put up. But I just said, in general principle, this was a big trailer that got a lot of attention. Why don't we have an interactive trailer like the Foundation series or even Dune got? This was made a lot of waves. So I was dealing with that behind the scenes and getting that in motion. I'll give you an update when it's actually posted. But that could be seen by hundreds of thousands of people because they'll put it around the wiki network for fandom it'll boost a lot of viewership for this, hopefully. So that's what I was busy with. What else has been going on in filming news? Not much we could really see, and then they got a second positive test for COVID. I don't really consider this, oh my god, I have to make a big announcement video about this, because this happened once before a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't consider it news then either, because it was one crew member, and as a precaution, they shut down, testing positive, but you're vaccinated. It's just you test positive, so you don't get really sick. Just a precaution that, like, they shut down on Wednesday last time and restarted on a Monday, that it was a difference of 3 days or something. It wasn't really that big. But due to the jigsaw puzzle of, well, that person isn't available, so we can't physically film the thing we needed to film, this will affect the filming on this slightly more, but just shifting things around by like a week. If you remember the big scheduling video I made, I said they're going to film in Cáceres for a 2-week block. They finished the first week of filming. This is the new exterior King's Landing sets, Cáceres in Spain. And now it's the weekend when I'm recording this, that instead of filming the second week of that block next week, that's pushed back to the first week of November, which is when we might get more spy photos and stuff out of that. Meanwhile, last week of October, next week, they'll be continuing to film in the nearby town of Trujillo, which is just east of Cáceres, which we actually got new spy photos from, that they have this really extensive marketplace scene they're building. And, we're never entirely sure where something is. It looks like a generic marketplace. It's probably somewhere in King's Landing. I mean, we never even confirmed if Old Town would appear in Season 1 on screen at all. They might just reference it. But, this is probably just another marketplace in King's Landing, particularly because the architecture is so similar to Cáceres, because it's right next to it. The bigger thing we're interested in is that next week is when they're scheduled to start filming at Monsanto Castle in Portugal. This is the first time they're filming in Portugal, which is just across the border from Cáceres. And we are seeing a lot of activity for this. Before the filming crew has even arrived, this is just the construction crew, they said there's over 200 crewmen that we've spotted there on this massive construction. Not filming teams, not camera crews, just the set builders alone. There's over 200 people working there. They are helicoptering in supplies with airdrops, because it's a relatively remote castle location. I don't think you can get like a train line there or something. We're not really sure what they're building. Some think it's the Eyrie. That's what I thought at first, but others are saying maybe this is the new location for Dragonstone. it's a castle up in the mountains, nowhere near the ocean like Dragonstone is, but they could put that in, composite, a matte painting to a CGI composite to add in the ocean from a different shot. I mean, that's what the Dragonstone castle you actually saw on screen. The causeway and the castle part were two separate castles, and they composite them. That's fine. Speaking of which, the reason we think this is the actual causeway they filmed on last time, the Dragonstone locations they had on the northern coast of Spain in the Basque Country, something physically happened to the set location. They physically can't go back to film there again, unfortunately. So this has led to speculation that maybe they're building up Monsanto as the new Dragonstone. And of course, there were other Dragonstone beach locations in Northern Ireland that they do not have access to anymore because they're not filming there anymore. I'm not sure, but we're getting a lot of reports now in Portuguese language news sites, mainstream news sites. So I know a decent number of my viewership here is from Brazil, so if you know Portuguese and English, you can check through all this, and not even just the news sites. I mean, regularly check the House of the Dragon hashtags on Twitter and stuff. If you can read the rumors going around in Portuguese language for this of spy reports being posted over Twitter and Instagram. Please check those out and tell us if you hear anything, because it's in Portuguese. And just scanning for, wow, they're helicoptering in this thing, or I saw someone at the train station, stuff like that. But we knew that was coming next week. That was according to schedule. Monsanto, Portugal will be filming next week. They'll be filming in Trujillo. Then they will be filming at Cáceres again first week in November. And these are professional filmmakers, unlike Benioff and Weiss, so I don't think this will be a problem. And Sapochnik himself has complained about this. I'm pretty sure Sapochnik was smart enough and just practical enough to schedule in rain days or COVID days, that they know COVID is a thing. They know one positive test shuts us down for a couple of days. It stands to reason that they've scheduled in, flex time for November is catch-up time for any delays due to weather or due to COVID. I think they planned for this in advance. Because as you remember from the Battle of the Bastards stuff, Sapochnik was the one desperately pleading with Benioff and Weiss, this schedule is running overtime, and they just say, it'll work if you use up all the rain days to film this horse charge and all the other stuff. They just overstuffed that episode, as they always do, and it was getting absurd. And he told them, just, if we use up all of our rain days on purpose, what happens if it rains? What happens if someone gets sick who's a core cast member? That when you use up all of your emergency time, what if there's an emergency? And he was the one arguing that. So now that he is credited as a co-showrunner, I think the way where other shows do this, where the director is credited as co-showrunner, this is something they should have done on Game of Thrones, where the scale Benioff and Weiss wanted was absurd. That when you make a director a co-showrunner, it puts a leash on the writers to know we need to worry about the practical considerations of, you can't just build this with, get 70 live horses, get literally 300 stuntmen, the biggest action scene ever, and film it in the middle of the night, and there won't be any water, and Sapochnik is the person you would put in charge to rein that in and go, for God's sake, you do not know how to film this from the logistical side of things. I do. So he's not just the director now, he's a co-showrunner. He was the one who was always arguing with Benioff and Weiss, don't use up your rain days, your emergency time. So with him as co-showrunner, they assuredly must have planned out some COVID days for, okay, we know we're probably going to be stopped once or twice due to COVID positives, and which has happened. So that's not a problem. Next week's Monsanto, then first week in November, will be the second half of the 2-week block that they intended for Cáceres, which might produce more spy photos, depending on if they do something big and in public, but they're supposed to. They're street scenes. Speaking of Sapochnik, he recently gave an interview in The Hollywood Reporter which has generated some discussion just because there hasn't been that much the past few days. I didn't want to clickbait you guys. It's not really that big of an interview. It's mostly about his most recent project, which was that TV movie for Apple with Tom Hanks, the robot thing. But for 2 paragraphs at the end, he briefly talks about House of the Dragon. And I don't want to like make a clickbait video with red arrows pointing around for this. He didn't really say that much of note. That it was nothing wrong. It's just he was elaborating on things Ryan Condal, the new showrunner, has said before, that we don't want to actively reject the visual style and format of Game of Thrones in terms of like the color palette or the clothing styles or the props will pretty much look like they belong in the same universe as Game of Thrones, but it's a different prequel era. So things will also look a bit different. And this pretty much matches what we saw in the teaser trailer. I mean, look at like Alison Hightower's costume in terms of the texture, in terms of the color palette, and the lighting, the filters, and everything. This looks like it is in the universe of Game of Thrones, but she's a new character with a new style. Same with the Velaryons and the Hightowers, that they're new, but they're part of that world. And I think they've actually managed to strike that balance pretty well. And the way Sapochnik phrased it was, I'm not going to change the color palette just for the sake of changing it, but other things will turn out different organically because it's new and it's growing. When I say color palette, recognize it takes a really long time for the director and cinematographers as a technical skill to figure out all of the color filters and lighting they want. You're not just pointing your iPhone at something. That there is a science to making stuff look movie quality, look TV quality, and not just something I recorded on my iPhone. Benioff and Weiss didn't really understand that and thought, oh, we can direct stuff. And it's like, that's like saying I can do brain surgery with no training. That these are trained, there is one guy whose job is get the lighting right. That there's another person who's a cinematographer. And I remember like seeing behind the scenes things on Breaking Bad where it was someone explaining the color swatches when they're figuring out the color palette. It's like, this episode we themed it green because of this, and these are the browns to contrast that. I can't find this off the top of my head, but there are behind the scenes things, if you've encountered them before, that a lot of thought goes into developing the color palette, the film grain, exactly what you're doing. And they just said, we're not going to change stuff just for the sake of changing it, but we're not, I don't think they want to say aloud, we're not restricted by Benioff and Weiss anymore. And that'll be interesting to see that, like, Benioff and Weiss didn't understand cinematography, so, like, they hated montages. They hated flashbacks, and they said flashbacks are lazy, and then later admitted in another thing, because we're bad at them. We're bad at keeping track of them. And there's this really cutting interview Sapochnik did with IndieWire a month after the finale. I'll go over that later in a lot of detail, where he is really getting technical and explaining, like, they didn't understand the terminology. I was telling them, well, are you doing a 3-camera setup, a 2-camera setup? And they're like, well, we don't have a style. And they didn't understand what he was asking them. So they're not changing. The costume thing is the easier point to grasp here, that we're not going to radically change the design of things just for the sake of that. But it'll be interesting to see how, like, the camera work plays out on this show now that Benioff and Weiss aren't micromanaging everyone. That, how, like, and I kept pointing this out, the long tracking shots with close-ups of the actors' faces, like, and this was really obvious by, like, the series finale that they directed themselves, where it's just this long tracking shot of Peter Dinklage's face where it got to the point it got awkward. Like, imagine if the shackles are off and they don't have to be forced to film stuff like that anymore, but Sapochnik can film things like a real director would, like when they gave him more control on filming Battle of the Bastards and it actually had some artistry to it. So imagine the best parts of Game of Thrones, by which we mean the parts Benioff and Weiss didn't micromanage. I'm feeling pretty happy about this. But the thing that really caught my eye in this is Sapochnik mentioned in passing that his film editor, who he'll be working with on all of his episodes, will be the same film editor he worked with on all of his episodes for Game of Thrones, Tim Porter. who will be returning for this series. That when you make an episode, there's basically a trifecta of the director, then the cinematographer, also known as director of photography, and the film editor. And he'd already mentioned in other interviews that Fabian Wagner was coming back as his cinematographer, who worked on him in all of his other episodes. So Sapochnik brought his whole team back. He's got the same cinematographer and the same film editor. And I've talked about in other videos, I have this whole video from like over a year ago on film editing, how it's weird how it flies under the radar because people dismiss it as a technical position, even though it actually is an artistic position, and it's relatively important, which is why studios always overlooked and didn't pay attention to it, so disproportionately more women have always been film editors going back to like the 1920s. But unlike cinematographers, where there's basically one for each director, there have only been 5 regular film editors on the entire run of Game of Thrones. 2 of them were from seasons 1 to 3, the other 2 were from seasons 4 to 8. Then there was Katie Wieland, who was editor for seasons 2 through 8. Everything except season 1. Katie Wieland edited 20 episodes out of 73. Like over a quarter of the episodes. She won an Emmy for it. I don't know if she's coming back. I'm not sure if the first 2 who left after season 3 are coming back, but the 2 who were doing it consistently from seasons 4 through 8, turns out both of them are coming back. One of them is Tim Porter, who worked with Sapochnik. The other one we already found out about a couple of weeks ago. I don't think I mentioned this before. Crispin Green. That the 2 editors who were from seasons 4 to 8 were Tim Porter and Crispin Green. And we recently saw on the website for Crispin Green's agent, it lists all the projects he's working on. And it said that he's working on House of the Dragon. And it even said specifically which director's episodes he's working on. It said Crispin Green is editing the episodes directed by Claire Kilner, who, as you'll remember, we saw on the beach directing young Rhaenyra and young Laenor. I don't know if they're the only 2 film editors, because sometimes you only have 2 people for a whole season doing the film editing, or if they'll have Katie. The question is Katie Wieland coming back, because she was nice. And I have a officially titled master list of all positions on the show that are slowly crewing up. I keep it on Reddit, and I update it occasionally. That the only big ones that aren't left are basically the stunt coordinator, plus specific cinematographers and the film editors. So we know Wagner's coming back for Sapochnik, but the 3 new directors will of course bring their own cinematographers, and we don't know who they are yet. More updates as I get them. I was also going to record something here for just a summary of suspected cast members. I'm going to split that off for time into its own separate thing, because it's actually very different from this. Please stick around for that.